Under the dim glow of the hospital corridor lights, I walked forward, each heartbeat counting down a secret I couldn't speak aloud. 20 years of dedication and trust, only to realize that the truth was buried beneath false smiles. On one fateful night, whispers behind a half-closed door tore apart every illusion. Keep everything neat. No one will suspect a thing. The cold voice echoed, pulling me into a dangerous spiral. I held a secret that could destroy everything or me along with it. Now, every step was the gamble, every glance a warning. Would I find enough courage to confront the lurking darkness? Or would I be consumed by the very place I once called home? My name is Evelyn Harper, and for over 20 years, I dedicated my life to start Margaret Hospital in New York City, not just as a nurse, but as a believer. You see, nursing isn't merely about checking vitals, administering medications, or scribbling notes into charts. It's about trust. Trust that every needle inserted, every pill given, every comforting word whispered holds integrity at its core. And I was damn good at holding on to that trust, even when the days dragged into endless nights, exhaustion blurring my vision as I reassured yet another frightened patient. I remember clearly, early in my career, how proud I felt donning that crisp white uniform, my badge clipped neatly, displaying Evelyn Harper. Every morning began the same way, arriving at 6 a.m., sipping bitter coffee, and trading tired but genuine smiles with my colleagues, who were as dedicated as I was. St. Margaret had become more than just a workplace. It was my home, my family. But looking back, I see now that betrayal doesn't announce itself with a bang, it creeps in quietly. Whispers behind closed doors, hiding in plain sight. There were small clues I ignored for months, things that felt off but seemed insignificant at the time. Like the time I noticed our pharmacy records didn't match the actual inventory. Just an oversight. Sarah Townsend, our financial manager, told me with a practiced smile, or how Richard Coleman, the respected hospital director, would abruptly end meetings whenever the topic of charity funds came up, his expression shifting subtly from warmth to steel, yet I kept ignoring it. Not because I was naive, but because confronting these suspicions meant admitting that my second home, my trusted family, might be built on lies. And honestly, facing that truth felt more terrifying than any emergency room crisis I'd ever encountered. But the more I tried to ignore those unsettling feelings, the louder they echoed in my thoughts at night, keeping me awake. I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeply wrong was happening behind those polished doors of administration. Something dark and insidious, carefully hidden beneath layers of goodwill and charity galas. Then came the moment that shattered my illusions forever. Late one evening, after an exhausting shift, as I passed by Richard's office, I overheard snippets of a hushed conversation between him and Sarah. Their voices, normally composed and reassuring, were edged with tension. "We can't keep doing this, Richard. Someone's going to notice eventually," Sarah whispered urgently. "Just keep things neat and no one will suspect a thing." Richard's cold, steady voice replied, standing frozen outside that closed office door. The realization hit me so hard, I felt physically ill. The people I respected most, the people who ran this place with charm and authority, were neck-deep in something terribly corrupt. And as my pulse quickened in horror and disbelief, I knew I was now holding a secret that could destroy everything or, if revealed, destroy me. Little did I know, that moment of clarity wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a nightmare I never saw coming. It started subtly, almost invisibly, like cracks slowly forming on glass you never even noticed existed. After overhearing Richard and Sarah, every seemingly innocent event from the past months began replaying in my mind, this time with new clarity, sharper edges, and deeper shadows. The first memory that resurfaced sharply was from nearly 6 months earlier. One afternoon, During a routine check of the pharmacy inventory, I discovered discrepancies small yet troubling. 5 vials of morphine and 2 boxes of insulin had vanished without proper documentation. When I approached Sarah, she waved it off casually, eyes warm but dismissive. "Oh, Evelyn, paperwork gets delayed. Nurses forget logs. It's just human error." She reassured me, her voice smooth as silk. Back then, her calm demeanor convinced me, but recalling it now, I remembered something unsettling. Sarah's brief hesitation, a fleeting glance away, a subtle tightening of her jaw. It was the first tiny red flag I'd willingly ignored. Another vivid memory soon followed. During our annual charity gala to raise funds for pediatric cancer research, Richard had proudly announced we'd raised $200, $1,000 a sum, met with enthusiastic applause. I'd celebrated wholeheartedly, genuinely proud to be part of something meaningful. But later that evening, as I passed the accounting office, I overheard a whispered argument. "That's not even close to the correct amount." "Richard," an unfamiliar male voice argued sharply, "leave this to me. I know exactly what I'm doing." Richard's voice replied coldly, authoritative and decisive. At the time, I dismissed it as administrative tension, normal enough in the complexities of hospital management. Yet now, each word, each tone took on sinister implications. My unease deepened further when I remembered Mary, a nurse I had worked closely with for years, unexpectedly requesting to switch shifts with me without a clear reason. She had insisted, almost pleading, something deeply unusual for her composed personality. I had agreed without question. That was precisely the day more medication had gone missing. A quiet, unsettling suspicion began to gnaw at my trust in Mary. Unsettling me further, then came a brief encounter with Eric, a young pharmacy assistant. One afternoon, he'd pulled me aside gently in the hallway, his eyes anxious, voice barely above a whisper. "Evelyn, you're well respected here, so just please, don't dig too deep. Some things aren't meant to be uncovered," he murmured, avoiding my gaze and quickly disappearing before I could respond. His warning lingered in my thoughts, cryptic and disturbing, adding another layer of confusion and fear to my growing anxiety. The puzzle pieces slowly slid into place one dreadful night at a formal fundraiser, where I saw Richard and Sarah deep in conversation with Senator Brian Hopkins, one of our largest charity donors. Their overly familiar gestures, whispered jokes, and subtle glances exchanged between them painted a disturbing picture. Why would the hospital's administrators and a powerful politician be exchanging such conspiratorial looks at a charity event? I spent sleepless nights after that, poring over notes, patient records, inventory sheets, documents I'd barely glanced at before, now carefully scrutinized under bright desk lamps. My apartment, typically neat and orderly, became a maze of folders, notes, and forgotten cups of coffee. The deeper I investigated, the clearer it became. This wasn't negligence. Something darker and meticulously planned was unfolding beneath my feet. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Yet, even as I resolved to uncover the truth, an icy dread settled deep within me because instinctively, I sensed that revealing these secrets might cost me everything I'd ever valued. 2 weeks later, the uneasy suspicions brewing inside me erupted into certainty in a way I couldn't have predicted. It was nearly midnight, and I'd stayed late to finish paperwork, a convenient excuse I'd used to quietly dig deeper into hospital records. The hallways were silent, illuminated only by the stark, cold glare of fluorescent lights passing Richard's office. I noticed something unusual. The door was slightly ajar. Richard was always meticulous, never careless enough to leave things unlocked. My heart raced, adrenaline making my hands tingle. Hesitating briefly, I realized this was my moment, either retreat or step into the unknown. Swallowing hard, I gently pushed the door open and slipped inside. His desk was a chaotic mess of files and documents, scattered hastily as if he'd been interrupted. My eyes landed immediately on an open ledger with columns of figures in red ink. Donations from our recent fundraiser were clearly listed, but alongside each were unfamiliar account names funds, transferred repeatedly into accounts I'd never heard of. My stomach tightened sharply. Next to these papers lay pharmacy documents, and my blood chilled at the sight inventories listed drugs, including insulin and morphine, as redistributed. Patient names had been logged as recipients. Patients I personally cared for and knew had never received such medications. Then something else caught my attention. A handwritten note. Unmistakably familiar Mary's handwriting. Her name appeared next to several unauthorized medication transfers. My heart dropped painfully. I felt an ache of betrayal deeper than I'd anticipated. How could Mary, someone I'd trusted implicitly for years, be involved in something so deeply corrupt frantically? I snapped quick pictures of everything with my phone, breathing hard, hands trembling slightly. I was about to leave when the faint murmur of voices echoed down the corridor. Growing louder, panic surged through my veins. In desperation, I quickly slipped into a nearby supply closet, my breathing shallow and rapid. The voices grew clearer. Richard and Sarah were approaching, their tones hushed yet tense. "You were right, Sarah. Someone has definitely been digging into the pharmacy records," Richard said coldly. Evelyn, Sarah suggested cautiously. "Almost certainly," Richard replied icily. "We need a plan to deal with her quickly and quietly before she ruins everything." I stiffened as their footsteps halted abruptly just outside the closet. For a long, unbearable moment, silence lingered. My pulse thundered deafeningly in my ears. I held my breath, desperately praying they'd move on. Finally, they continued down the hall, their conversation fading, but leaving an icy dread in my chest. Shaking, I carefully emerged, only to realize with a sickening jolt that my ID badge had fallen off in my haste. Now lying ominously under Richard's desk, I picked it up swiftly, but the realization crashed over me heavily. How easily I could have been exposed just moments ago. As I walked numbly from the office, shadows felt deeper, colder, whispering threats I'd never fully considered before tonight. The hospital corridors I'd once seen as comforting now stretched ahead like a dark tunnel. I knew, undeniably, that I'd passed a point of no return. The evidence was clear, but the cost of exposing it was equally clear. The battle awaiting me would test my strength, my courage, and quite possibly take from me everything I valued most. In the days following my disturbing discovery, I felt increasingly trapped within an invisible net tightening around me. Each morning, waking up felt harder, like surfacing through dark waters weighed down by dread. Conversations with colleagues became exhausting. Every casual remark seemed loaded with hidden suspicion, determined to expose the truth. I started collecting evidence meticulously, secretly photographing pharmacy logs, financial records, and confidential memos. Each snapshot felt like stepping onto a tightrope above a deep, perilous chasm. One evening, I slipped quietly into the records room, convinced I was alone. My heart thundered as I flipped quickly through a thick ledger, camera in hand, documenting more discrepancies. Suddenly, footsteps echoed sharply in the hallway. My blood turned hastily. I shoved documents back into place, scrambling to appear natural. Just as I tucked my phone into my pocket, Mary entered, smiling softly but with an edge I'd never noticed before. "Working late?" "Evelyn," she asked, eyeing the ledger suspiciously. "Just finishing up some paperwork," I replied, forcing calmness into my voice despite the panic tightening my throat. Her gaze lingered a moment too long before she nodded slowly. "Take care. It's easy to overdo it." As she left, the weight of suspicion felt suffocating. My trust in Mary had already crumbled, but this encounter left me reeling. How deeply was she involved? From that moment on, paranoia became my constant shadow. Each corridor I walked felt darker, colder. Several times, I sensed eyes following me, only to turn swiftly and see a fleeting shadow vanish around the corner. A creeping unease settled in my bones, heightened by each encounter. Then one morning, I found a small, unmarked envelope placed deliberately on my desk. Inside, a single, cryptic note: "Stop digging. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The anonymous warning made my skin crawl. I glanced nervously around the nursing station, suddenly suspicious of everyone. Who had left it, Richard? Sarah, Mary, or someone else entirely? Fear threatened to paralyze me, but anger fueled my resolve even further. Later that evening, Eric pulled me aside again in the cafeteria, his eyes darting anxiously before speaking. "Evelyn, listen carefully. There's a shipment medication being moved secretly tomorrow night at the rear loading dock. Around midnight. If you're serious about catching them, that's your chance." I stared at him, heart pounding fiercely. "How do you know?" He swallowed hard, voice shaking slightly. I overheard Sarah confirming it. "They're nervous. Evelyn, they're tightening security. Be careful." His warning left me conflicted, grateful, yet terrified. Every step I took now felt increasingly dangerous, as though each moment carried the risk of exposure or something even worse. Late that night, alone in my apartment, documents spread chaotically across my table. Exhaustion clouded my thoughts. Memories surfaced sharply, the countless shifts spent shoulder to shoulder with Mary, the times Sarah and I celebrated fundraising successes, Richard's reassuring presence during crisis. Betrayal gnawed painfully at my core, and tears of frustration blurred my vision briefly before I wiped them fiercely away. I knew clearly now that my battle wasn't just against corruption. It was also a brutal war against my own trust, my sense of security, and friendships built carefully over decades. Yet, even as fear gripped me relentlessly, I knew turning back was impossible. This journey had already stripped away every illusion I'd once held dear. Whatever the consequences, I had to continue, even if it meant walking this perilous road completely alone. The moment I handed my detailed report to the hospital board, I felt an uneasy weight lift momentarily, only to crash back down heavier than ever when I was urgently summoned just 2 days later. Walking into the conference room felt like stepping onto a stage set for my own downfall. Richard and Sarah sat calmly, their eyes glinting with cold triumph. "Please have a seat." "Evelyn," the chairman began curtly. His tone sent a chill down my spine. I sat stiffly, heart pounding, dread swelling as he pushed a thick folder across the polished table toward me. My breath caught painfully as I flipped open the file. Inside lay the familiar documents I'd meticulously gathered but altered, corrupted. More alarmingly, several pages bore a flawless forgery of my signature, linking me directly to the embezzlement of medications and charity funds. This can't be," I stammered, horror strangling my voice. "These signatures aren't mine. This is fabricated." Richard smiled coldly, his eyes unyielding. "Unfortunately, Evelyn, these documents were discovered hidden in your personal locker. Your colleagues can testify." At his cue, Mary entered quietly, eyes fixed firmly on the floor. My heart sank further. "Mary," I whispered, pleading desperately for her to meet my gaze. She hesitated before speaking, voice soft yet cutting. "I'm sorry. Evelyn, I saw you accessing restricted medication files late at night. You seemed secretive, anxious." My mind reeled in disbelief. The betrayal was agonizing. Mary, whom I'd trusted implicitly, was now twisting my actions into something sinister. I was investigating. My voice cracked with desperation. "Richard and Sarah have been stealing from the hospital." Sarah leaned forward, calm and composed, her expression carefully neutral. "Evelyn, I know this is difficult, but deflecting blame won't help you." Suddenly, the conference room door opened, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence instantly escalating the tension. "Ms. Harper, we need you to come with us," one officer stated firmly, his voice devoid of sympathy. Panic surged. "Wait, Please, someone here has to know this is a setup. As I scanned their faces in desperation, my eyes caught Dr. Emily Warren, one of the senior physicians. She stared back at me, her expression conflicted, clearly disturbed by the unfolding events. Her brief, troubled glance felt oddly like a lifeline, faint and uncertain. But present, the officers approached, urging me firmly to stand. Colleagues watched silently from the hallway. As I was escorted past them, some looked horrified. Others looked away guiltily. Mary stood apart, visibly shaken yet unwilling to speak. My shame and confusion deepened, blending into a crushing despair. Outside, the cold air slapped painfully against my face as reality closed around me. Richard and Sarah had meticulously orchestrated this from the very beginning, anticipating every move I'd made, every late night, every document collected, had been twisted expertly into a narrative painting me as the culprit. Yet, beneath the raw humiliation, a faint glimmer of hope flickered. Josh. Warren's conflicted look replayed vividly in my mind, suggesting at least one person questioned the official story. Perhaps I wasn't completely alone after all, but as the police car door closed firmly behind me, the bitter truth was undeniable. I had underestimated the cruelty and precision of those I'd once trusted. The battle had just escalated dramatically, and the consequences I faced were now terrifyingly real. As we pulled away from the hospital, my second home for over 2 decades, I realized grimly that the cost of seeking justice was higher than I'd ever imagined. And yet, despite everything, my resolve had never felt stronger. Returning to the hospital after my arrest felt like stepping into hostile territory. I could sense the change immediately. Colleagues quickly averting their eyes, whispered conversations silencing abruptly as I approached, leaving tense, accusatory quietness hanging thickly in the air. Entering the nurses' station was like stepping onto a battlefield. The usual camaraderie was replaced by tense glances and whispered judgments. When I opened my locker, my stomach lurched sharply. A family photo I had pinned carefully was torn in half, the pieces carelessly left as a harsh, silent message. My heart ached bitterly at the violation. Rumors spread swiftly. Distorted lies whispered loudly enough for me to overhear. Words stabbed cruelly into my consciousness. Evelyn was always too perfect, wasn't she? Makes sense now? She fooled us all these years. You never know someone's true colors. I felt utterly alone, drowning in isolation, desperate for clarity. I confronted Mary privately in an empty corridor. My voice shook with suppressed pain. Mary, why did you lie about me after everything we've shared? She hesitated, guilt flickering in her eyes before fading behind a hardened expression. You don't understand. Evelyn, Richard and Sarah, they control everything. If I defended you, I'd lose my job, my reputation, everything. I'm sorry, but you walked into this yourself. Her words stung deeply, tearing open wounds I wasn't sure could ever heal. Watching her turn away, leaving me alone, felt like another harsh betrayal on top of all the rest. Later that evening, drained and broken, I was startled when Dr. Emily Warren approached cautiously, glancing nervously around before speaking in a low voice. Evelyn, please, can we talk privately? In the deserted lounge, she spoke quickly and quietly, urgency in her eyes. Listen, Evelyn, something isn't right. Those documents, they're too perfect, too convenient. I can't publicly question them without proof. But I believe you. Her hesitant support, however tentative, filled me briefly with hope, yet it vanished almost as quickly when she added sadly, but you must understand, I can't openly help you. Not yet. Left alone again. Her words echoed painfully in my mind, support that could not yet be spoken aloud, leaving me both comforted and utterly vulnerable. Each day, the hostile whispers grew louder. Each interaction felt sharper, colder. My once respected position was now openly mocked. My presence met with silence or thinly veiled hostility. Notes left on my locker grew increasingly cruel. Anonymous warnings demanding my resignation, accusing me of crimes I'd never imagined committing. Every shift felt torturous, every moment heavy with suspicion and hostility. My reputation, painstakingly built over decades, lay shattered around me, pieces scattered beyond repair. But amid that unbearable isolation, something inside me hardened defiantly. Their cruel treatment, the twisted rumors, Mary's heartbreaking betrayal all fueled a determination unlike any I'd ever known. I realized I wasn't fighting just for my reputation anymore. I was fighting for truth, integrity, and perhaps most of all, for the woman I knew myself to be, even as despair threatened to overwhelm me. That quiet, stubborn resilience whispered that my story wasn't yet finished. The hospital, my colleagues, Richard and Sarah, they might have tried to break me, but I was determined, no matter how alone I stood, to face whatever battle awaited next, determined not to give in. I prepared meticulously for the next confrontation with the hospital board, convinced my detailed counter-evidence would finally unveil Richard and Sarah's corruption. Hours were spent cross-checking facts, verifying timelines, and compiling irrefutable proof of their deception. Yet, the moment I stepped back into the sterile conference room, my confidence wavered. Richard sat serenely beside Sarah, his expression confident, almost amused, as if anticipating my every move. Unease tightened in my chest as I set down my carefully organized files. "Evelyn," Richard began smoothly, his voice coldly polite. "We have someone here who can help clarify matters." Before I could respond, the door opened, and a pharmacy technician, Jacob Miller, stepped into the room. My stomach twisted painfully. Jacob, quiet, diligent, trustworthy. Why was he here? Jacob avoided my gaze as he spoke hesitantly, voice shaking with apparent sincerity. I saw Evelyn altering inventory logs several times. She asked me not to mention it, claiming she was correcting minor errors. I never imagined she was stealing. My heart sank sharply at his blatant lie. "Jacob, that's not true. You know it's not." My voice trembled despite my efforts to stay calm. Jacob glanced quickly at Richard, fear evident in his eyes before he stepped back, unwilling to say more. The damage was already done. Frantically, I opened my files, desperate to show them evidence disproving his claim. But what I saw made my blood run cold. My documents had been altered remotely, key details erased, dates changed subtly enough to cast doubt on their credibility. "My files, someone's tampered with them," I stammered. Shock gripping me, Richard leaned forward slightly, eyes glittering dangerously. "Evelyn, accusing others won't change the facts. Consider carefully how far you wish to push these accusations." His veiled threat sent a chill down my spine, amplifying my sense of vulnerability and helplessness. I turned desperately toward Dr. Warren, hoping for any hint of support, but she avoided my gaze, face unreadable, carefully neutral. The silence around the table felt suffocating, each unspoken word sharpening my isolation. The meeting ended abruptly, a devastating defeat shrouded in polite, meaningless formalities. Humiliation and despair weighed heavily on my shoulders as I left the room, realizing just how thoroughly outmaneuvered I'd been. As I gathered my scattered papers alone afterward, my phone buzzed softly. A message from an unknown number appeared briefly on the screen. "I believe you, Evelyn, but they're watching me too. Be careful. E.W. Dr. Warren's initials sent a brief surge of hope through me, quickly smothered by the harsh reality that her support could only be whispered in secret. Returning home later that evening, I found my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, my belongings lay scattered. Someone had searched thoroughly, violating even this final refuge. Panic surged bitterly. Their message was unmistakably clear. I was being closely watched, and nowhere was safe. Collapsing exhausted onto my sofa, I felt tears of frustration and rage burning my eyes. The careful illusion of fairness, justice, and truth had shattered completely. This was no longer a simple professional conflict. This was psychological warfare, ruthless and deeply personal. Yet beneath my despair, something hardened, crystallizing into unyielding resolve. They had wounded me profoundly, stripped away my dignity, and threatened my safety. But despite this crushing defeat, I refused to let them extinguish my determination. Even now, battered and nearly broken, I knew the real fight was far from over. As the days turned into weeks, the situation only deteriorated further. Every effort I made to reveal the truth was swiftly countered. Twisted beyond recognition by Richard and Sarah's cunning maneuvers, reality itself became malleable under their control, bending to their will, leaving me fighting desperately for footing in a world turned utterly against me. One morning, I received an anonymous tip, a recorded conversation between Richard and Sarah clearly discussing embezzlement. It seemed like the breakthrough I needed. The missing piece to finally prove their corruption, heart racing. I quickly brought the recording to the authorities. Yet, my fragile optimism shattered brutally when I was summoned once again to the boardroom. Richard sat calmly, holding out a similar recorder. Evelyn, are you truly this desperate, confused? I watched as he pressed play. The audio played back clearly, but now, somehow, it was my voice on the tape, calmly discussing embezzlement, casually admitting guilt, my voice but twisted, altered, my mouth opened in shock, no words escaping. Richard smiled coldly. Falsifying evidence against us is a serious crime. Evelyn, I never... My voice cracked, panic and disbelief choking me. You've altered this recording. Sarah shook her head sadly, her eyes filled with fake sympathy. Evelyn, we understand how difficult it is to face accountability, but blaming others won't help. Every desperate defense I uttered was drowned beneath their calculated manipulation. The authorities, the board, even my former colleagues now listened unquestioningly to their version of reality, seeing me as increasingly unstable, a woman clinging desperately to false innocence. Rumors intensified, fueled expertly by Richard and Sarah. Whispers that I was mentally unstable circulated relentlessly through the hospital halls, spreading out into the community like wildfire. People who'd known me for decades now viewed me cautiously, eyes filled with pity or suspicion. Returning to my apartment became unbearable. Anonymous, threatening notes left at my door, my belongings repeatedly disturbed. The subtle intimidation grew openly hostile, eroding my sense of security, driving me toward isolation. One evening, exhausted and desperate, I tried contacting Jacob Miller privately, hoping for a shred of honesty. Instead, my call was answered by Richard himself, his voice soft yet venomous. Evelyn, you really should stop before things become truly irreversible. You've lost already. How did you fear gripped my chest? The full extent of his control suddenly terrifyingly clear. You underestimate us. Evelyn, he whispered dangerously. We know every move you make. I hung up quickly, heart pounding painfully in my chest. It felt impossible. Every path I tried was blocked, twisted, or manipulated. Each attempt to reach truth only drew the net tighter around me, suffocating hope beneath layers of carefully orchestrated lies. Yet, even amid my despair, Dr. Warren's whispered support returned to me repeatedly. Perhaps there was still a sliver of hope, no matter how slight or dangerous. Determined not to be entirely silenced, I cautiously reached out to her again, but this time, there was no reply, only unsettling silence. Days later, the hospital released an official statement publicly condemning my actions, branding me a criminal, permanently staining my reputation. Watching the news broadcast alone, hearing my name and face tied irrevocably to dishonesty and betrayal, felt devastatingly final. Every carefully crafted lie Richard and Sarah wove had solidified into a distorted truth, becoming the only version anyone else saw or heard. Sitting alone in darkness, isolated and broken. I finally understood the ruthless, undeniable power they wielded. In this twisted reality, truth held no weight, only power, influence, and the cruel efficiency with which my entire life had been dismantled piece by piece. Days blurred into weeks as every remaining part of my life crumbled away piece by piece. The hospital's formal termination letter arrived swiftly, coldly severing the final ties to the place I had dedicated my entire adult life. Holding that brief notice felt like gripping a shard of ice, painfully marking the end of 20 years of relentless service. Every news outlet in the city echoed the carefully orchestrated narrative Richard and Sarah had crafted my face, now synonymous with corruption and deceit. My phone vibrated relentlessly with hateful messages, each one twisting deeper into my wounded pride. Strangers accused me, condemned me without hesitation, echoing lies that had become the world's accepted truth. But worse than the judgment from strangers was the silence from those I loved. My brother called only once, his voice hesitant, cautious. "Evelyn, maybe. Maybe it's better if you distance yourself. You have to understand. The family is struggling. We just don't know what to believe anymore." His uncertainty hurt worse than outright rejection. Even my own flesh and blood doubted me now, unsure whether the person they'd known their whole lives was real or merely a facade. Attempting to find comfort, I dialed my closest friend, Rachel, hoping for a sliver of reassurance. But when she picked up, the conversation was painfully brief, her voice filled with uneasy restraint. "Evelyn, things are just so complicated right now. I think we should take some space." The click as she hung up echoed painfully in my ears. A few days later, stepping outside briefly for groceries, I spotted Mary across the street. She noticed me immediately, her eyes widened, then quickly dropped, avoiding my gaze as she hurried away like a stranger. That brief moment cut deeper than I expected. Memories of late-night coffee breaks, shared laughter, whispered confidences flashed painfully through my mind, each recollection now cruelly twisted by betrayal. Returning home to my apartment felt oppressive, my isolation becoming physically suffocating. Bills piled higher. The job market had firmly closed its doors, each rejection harsher than the last. Calls to attorneys and media outlets, desperate pleas for help, were met only with curt dismissals, their words laced with disdain and distrust. My desperation and helplessness intensified, each dismissal reinforcing my powerlessness. One bitter evening, as I numbly scrolled through channels, I froze in disbelief. On screen stood Richard and Sarah, smiling warmly for cameras at a charity event, praised as community heroes for their dedication to vulnerable children. Richard spoke eloquently about integrity, compassion, and transparency, his voice calm and authoritative. Sarah stood beside him, her carefully rehearsed smile flawless, radiating sincerity. Watching them bask in praise while my own reputation burned in ashes filled me with nauseating despair. They were celebrated, protected, respected while I sat alone, labeled a criminal, my truth silenced beneath layers of calculated lies. The injustice felt overwhelming, crushing me completely, unable to bear the isolation. I reached out one final time to Dr. Warren, clinging desperately to the last thread of support I believed existed. But the phone rang endlessly, unanswered. The silent refusal spoke louder than words, confirming my worst fear that even the faintest hope had vanished completely. Later that night, sitting numbly in my apartment, another news report aired. A local prosecutor announced plans to pursue charges aggressively, describing my supposed crimes with clinical detachment. Public comments scrolled viciously across the screen, hundreds condemning me without hesitation or doubt. In the crushing quiet afterward, a message appeared on my phone. "Dr. Warren again." Her words brief, hesitant, and heartbreakingly final. "I'm sorry. Evelyn, I tried everything I could, but it's impossible. They've made sure no one can help you now." The last faint glimmer of hope inside me extinguished instantly, leaving only a cold void of despair. I realized in that harrowing moment that the damage was irreversible, absolute. My life was now defined solely by loss of dignity, of trust, of connection. Standing slowly, I moved to the window, staring blankly at the city lights below. Each pinpoint of light seemed distant, unreachable, a reminder of everything I had lost. Every friendship, every trust, every piece of the life I'd painstakingly built over decades, erased in mere weeks. An unbearable weight settled heavily inside me as the realization sank in completely. My pursuit of truth had not led to justice. Instead, it had cost me everything and left me utterly alone, discarded by a world eager to believe comforting lies over uncomfortable truths. As silence enveloped me, I recognized bitterly that Richard and Sarah had not just stolen my reputation. They had robbed me of my entire identity, my humanity. Standing there alone in the darkness, the pain became almost too heavy to bear. Yet even then, beneath the crushing loss and absolute isolation, a faint, stubborn defiance stirred quietly. I had been broken, abandoned, betrayed, but something within me still refused to surrender entirely. The world might never see me as I truly was again, but deep inside, I still knew the truth. Even now, it was all I had left to hold on to. Weeks stretched painfully into months, each passing day drawing me further into an abyss of despair. I had become utterly invisible, discarded, forgotten by everyone I once loved and trusted. My savings had vanished entirely, replaced by towering piles of unpaid bills that mocked me silently from the kitchen table. My body grew weaker, bones visible beneath pale skin, eyes sunken from lack of nourishment and sleep. Food had lost all meaning. Sleep became fragmented by relentless nightmares, leaving me trembling each morning in cold sweat. I avoided the mirror, unable to confront the ghost I'd become. One particularly bitter night, the cold seeped mercilessly into my small apartment. Heat had become an unattainable luxury, leaving me shivering in layers of blankets. I gathered my remaining strength and knocked weakly at my neighbor's door. A woman I'd exchanged pleasantries with for years. Her expression was wary, guarded. As she barely opened the door, "Please, could I borrow a blanket?" I whispered, ashamed yet desperate. Her hesitation spoke volumes. "I'm sorry. Evelyn," she muttered uncomfortably, eyes averted. "I can't be involved. You understand." The door shut gently but firmly, leaving me standing alone in the frigid hallway, the cruel sting of rejection deepening my isolation. Returning home, my heart sank further when I noticed a letter slipped beneath my apartment door. The envelope bore the hospital's official insignia. With shaking hands, I tore it open, finding a single, impersonal sentence inside. "Ms. Harper, please cease all further contact immediately. Any additional attempts will result in legal action." The cold, bureaucratic threat landed like a blow, severing my last tie to the life I'd once cherished. The place I had poured my soul into had not only cast me aside, they wanted me erased entirely. Desperate, I sat down at the table and wrote one final letter, pouring every detail of the truth onto the paper, carefully addressing it to my brother, Rachel, and even Dr. Warren. My fingers trembled as I sealed each envelope, the act itself a final plea for understanding. Days later, those same letters returned unopened, marked simply, "Return to sender." Each returned envelope felt like a dagger driven directly into my chest, confirmation of how completely they'd abandoned me. As I sat alone that evening, despair tightened around me, heavier and more oppressive than ever. From the apartment next door, laughter echoed suddenly warm, carefree, a sharp contrast to the suffocating silence around me. The laughter felt cruel, mocking, highlighting just how invisible and forgotten I had become. Life continued happily without me, indifferent to my suffering. I switched on the television, numbly seeking distraction, only to be confronted again by the smiling faces of Richard and Sarah. They stood proudly before cameras, accepting yet another award for their unwavering commitment to integrity and charity. Richard spoke with practiced sincerity about the importance of trust, compassion, and truth, his every polished lie twisting painfully within me. Seeing them praised openly, celebrated for virtues they'd crushed beneath their feet, felt unbearably unjust, tearing fresh wounds in an already shattered soul. As days wore on, my health deteriorated further. Weakness enveloped me entirely, movements growing increasingly difficult. The world narrowed down to my small, darkened room. No phone calls came. No knocks at my door. Silence became my only companion. Eventually, even the simple act of standing became impossible. One cold evening, as snow softly blanketed the world outside, I collapsed onto the floor, breathing shallow and uneven. Consciousness slipped slowly away, the edges of reality blurring into darkness. As my eyes fluttered closed, fragmented memories surfaced, painfully long shifts at Margaret's, warm moments shared with family, laughter with colleagues now long gone. Each memory dissolved bitterly into oblivion, overshadowed by the harsh truth I had lost everything fighting for justice, only to learn too late that justice itself was nothing but an illusion. My heartbeat slowed, each beat weaker than the last, my mind surrendering gradually to darkness. Yet even then, my thoughts lingered stubbornly, tracing the outlines of the life stolen from me by deception and manipulation. In those final moments, I understood clearly the cruel reality of my journey. Speaking truth had cost me everything, and in return, the world had offered nothing but silence, isolation, and unending despair. I lay motionless, alone, unseen, unheard, as life quietly slipped from my weakened grasp. No redemption arrived. No comforting revelation or rescue came, only a quiet surrender to the merciless unfairness of a world where power, not truth, ruled unchallenged. And as my breath faded softly into silence, the injustice of my story remained unspoken, unseen, forever lost in the cold darkness of abandonment. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.